Quiet chaos driving me mad. Chapter 10. I walked out of my room, the phone bouncing in my hand while the speed of my steps increased. I went down the hallway in seconds, the wind seeming to break with each passing moment, and my father's voice becoming louder while I heard him speaking to someone in the kitchen. I slowed my steps, and I placed my backside against the wall, obscuring me from view on the part of anyone that was in the kitchen. "You better leave him alone with this woman thing," my mother said. "I don't see the problem with giving him a little guidance," my father replied. "You're trying to get him to give in to his distractions. Liking women is one thing, but if you talk to a bunch of them and you get the same result, even if you try different things, you have to accept the fact that it doesn't work. That's quitter talk. That's pragmatic talk. You have to get him out of thinking he's missing out on something by not having this. What am I supposed to tell a young man that sees his parents married, his classmates in relationships, and all forms of media and detractors trying to paint a guy with trouble in this department as less of a man? I understand that he won't like being termed that way, but he has to get things done, like get out of school and get a job before he starts believing he's some failure. You realize a good chunk of that opinion, his opinion of himself, will always be tied to his relationship with others, right? He probably wouldn't think he could maintain my relationships outside. He probably wouldn't think he could maintain any relationships outside his family if Trey wasn't around. What does Trey have to do with this? I'm saying that he has hope from that relationship that he can connect with people that aren't his relatives. He told me that. I then silently stepped through the hallway and into the living room, rearing my head before joining the pair in the kitchen. "Look who's been ear hustling," my mother said, smirking. "It wasn't that hard to do. You believe that my attempts to quell something that constantly bugs me are for naught? I believe your attempts to quell something bothering you should be met with talking to your parents about it because you want to. That belief system doesn't align with what's happened. You wouldn't have had me tell you what happened during that date with Sam if you thought I had a right to privacy on this matter." She clapped her hands. "I found that woman and directed her to you," she said, breaking out in laughter. "And yet you don't believe you should tell me how it went? Priceless." "She makes a good point, son," my father added, "but she's missing the point," I told him. "I get that she was the sole factor in that date even becoming a thing, but she told us she thinks I should be without questions on this subject, though beforehand asked me questions about this subject." I sat down in the chair on the opposite side of my mother at the table. "It doesn't add up." "Then we'll stay out of your love life forever from now on," my mother replied, smirking and then standing from the chair. She proceeded to walk out of the room. There was little difference to how she walked all the other times I've seen her stepping around the house in years prior, and the smile suggested she was fine with the choice that she had made to sever her involvement. My father took her seat right after her footsteps were no longer audible, as though to confirm she would not come back into the room. He placed his hand over his mouth and stared into my eyes, trying not to smile at the gesture that was relatively new out of all the behaviors I'd seen him exercise. "Your mother's really, really hurt," he told me. "She sure didn't look that way to me," I replied. "She's also really, really good at being passive-aggressive and not showing it. Don't be surprised if she acts the same way she always does, except without asking you about these women tomorrow. Speaking of these women, I was going to ask you what I should say to Sam. She sent me a text message asking if she did something wrong since I didn't respond to her." "You might want to respond as soon as possible, but wouldn't that be the reverse of what you told me? I was going to answer her soon, but I didn't know if it would conflict with what you've told me. You have to use your gut sometimes. If you know in your gut she's okay for you, tell her that." I nodded my head, and he leaned over to the table, placing his face closer to my left ear. "You better go talk to your mother before you do any of the other stuff," he said. I walked out of the room without giving him the look. The aforementioned look was one that many people give their parents when trying to signify their willingness to obey a command. It was one that my siblings and I knew to use whenever possible. I waned in my usage of the look in recent years, and I can only align the decline with my confidence in my parents believing I'll do what they want, having risen since my childhood. When I arrived in my parents' bedroom, my mother was standing closely to the television, and she was staring into the screen intently, almost to stop herself from being tempted to look at anything or anyone that was around her. "Hey," I called out to her. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'd like to say I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. That sounds fairly generic. I'm without words of originality, but my feelings of remorse are very new." "Fine, whatever. You're forgiven." I nodded my head and walked over to the room door. "I know you still are upset, probably upset with me," I said. I don't know what you're talking about, she replied. After leaving the room, I went to my own and sent a text to Sam. You're fine, I typed. I was kind of worried that you would become tired of me if I showed you enough interest. That sounds kind of backwards, she told me. It sounds that way because it is. I talked with my parents about us going out again on Friday and they approved. Good, what time should we meet up? I would think around 11 or 12 a.m., I replied. 11 or 12 p.m., I replied. So it would be a lunch date. That's right. I was thinking I could pick you up this time around. Why can't I do it? I laughed. So the reverse? Yeah, she told me. Okay, you know how to get over here. Will do. See you Friday. There was a knock at my door that commenced while I was typing a response to Sam's last reply. I went over to the door, and my father appeared from the other side, having begun walking into the room when I was close to touching the knob. He was dressed in a red t-shirt and a pair of black pants, which he placed his hands in the pockets of. "I've got a special presentation for you," he said. "This is the story of how not to be a romance red shirt." Isn't that a Star Trek reference? Yep. He squatted in place. "I don't want you to be the guy who says, 'Oh, baby, please don't leave me. I'll do anything you want, but just don't leave me.'" He took on a whiny and high-pitched tone with the line of the supposed romance red shirt. "Then she leaves you and you become so sad," he continued. "You're walking up to people, hunched over and saying, 'I just can't go on without her. She was everything I wanted. How come she knows this and leave me?'" I laughed. "So what's the deal with this Sam woman? Is she still trying to message you every other hour?" he asked. I shook my head. "She's slowed down a bit," I answered, but for the sake of accuracy, it was never every hour. My hyperbole was to show my own tiredness with how much she was coming after you. I'm a little worried she might say some of the stuff I've just told you if you cut it off. I don't intend to end it, so maybe she won't turn out that way. The remainder of the week was me doing housework and various errands around the home. The morning of Friday, I got dressed and went to the kitchen, where I poured milk into a bowl and heard footsteps coming from the living room, being louder with each passing moment. When Sarah became visible, the latter rubbing her eyes while her bare feet pressed against the marble, I waved at her. She did the same and came over to me, pressing her head against my chest. "Can you make me some cereal?" Sarah asked. I nodded my head and breathed a sigh. I should have known the more compassionate she appeared, the more she wanted you to do something for her. I went over to the cabinet and retrieved the cereal box. After pouring another bowl, I handed it over to her, and she hugged me, her face becoming buried in my chest. "Thanks, Augustus," she said. You only act nicer when I give you something," I told her. "That's not true. Would you have hugged me if I didn't prepare that bowl for you?" She stared into my eyes. "Probably not," she admitted. "And do you not see a problem with that?" I asked. "Not really. I was just trying to show I was appreciative. And I appreciate that, but it wouldn't hurt to tell someone thank you without them doing something right then and there." "Thank you." She had a smirk on her face. I immediately shook my head and grabbed my own bowl, walking through the living room and into my bedroom. Closing the door behind me, I ate some of the cereal before hearing a knock. "Can I come in?" Sarah asked, her head peeking through the door. "I would rather you not," I replied. She walked in and closed the door behind her, her cereal bowl in the other hand. "Apparently my wishes are going to be disregarded," I told her. "So what's been going on?" she asked me. "Well, my little sister won't leave my room and she's bothering me." "Okay, I'll come back in 50 minutes. She opened the door with the hand not holding the bowl and walked out, closing it behind her. The remaining 4 hours of the morning were spent by me watching some television in my bedroom and mentally preparing for the outing, thinking in advance about how I would greet her, how I would explain away not contacting her when she was doing the reverse, how I would keep her entertained throughout the whole encounter. I walked through the hallway and front door of my home without being seen by my father, as my mother and siblings had all gone to work and school. I locked the door behind me and started my vehicle, receiving another text message from Sam. "I'm already here," she wrote. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I replied. I drove down the streets at the same speed I would do any other day. Traffic was a moderate component of the outing, and various cars lining the lanes and numbering about 2 or 3 per each one. When I arrived at the restaurant, I noticed there was enough parking space available for me to be able to be choosy about my spot, and I quickly pulled into a space mere steps away from the establishment's door. Walking inside, I noticed Sam sitting on a bench and fiddling around with her cell phone. "Hey," she said to me, standing up and giving me a hug. "Hi," I replied. "Did you order yet?" "Yeah, I was just waiting here so you wouldn't get confused." "Okay, let's go." We ordered our seats and went over to them, the table we had being similar to the one from our initial date. The occasion was also used to order our food once more and have our menus taken. "So how was your week?" she asked me. "It was okay," I replied, "nothing special." "I didn't know you were as busy as you were." "What makes you say that?" "Well, considering you didn't say anything back all those times I reached out, I figured something was up." I shook my head and placed my left palm on it, trying to smile while speaking. "I would have messaged you all the times that you did me," I said, "but second-guessing whether that would be attractive to you in the long run was enough to make me reconsider." She smiled. "So you were so worried that I was plotting a trap to know if you were more into me than I was into you?" Sam asked. "That's exactly it," I said. "You really thought I was that smart?" Sometimes people want to know in advance when someone is, and they do things to try and get them to reveal themselves. I began smiling while she playfully pushed her hand against my arm, covering her face with the other hand while giggling and closing her eyes. There was a burst of music that followed this, and it was coming from under the table, likely her pocket. "Hold on," she said, still smiling and seemingly trying to contain her laughter. "My ex is calling me."